So the subject today is how do you de-risk a deal? Um, and in a tough economy, finding opportunity pipeline is really important. And I would argue that the most difficult and the most important phase of selling is not closing, it's actually opening, right? How do we break into the world of a new potential customer? And one of the huge problems that every market here in Australia, yourselves in New Zealand, the US, the UK, all around the world, one of the big problems all organizations are experiencing is their sellers and maybe even their marketers are good enough to generate a level of interest, but not good enough to generate real intent on the client side to actually invest in change. Because when things are uncertain, what people will defer to is do nothing. Even if they've got a problem, they'll go and investigate, they'll have a look, they'll ask for proposals. But the danger is they look, they discover more about their own problem and what's really involved in solving it, and people are increasingly risk averse. So what I might do is I know there's a very special corner in hell for people that inflict PowerPoint on others, but I do have some slides. I have a fatal flaw in everything I do. I have too much content, so I'll try not to race through and make sure that there's time for Q&A. But I'm going to provide you with, in essence, a meta framework for thinking about how do I manage deal risk, and whether you're having a coffee with your sales rep in a coffee shop and you just get the back of a napkin and a pen and start to talk to them about their deal, or whether it's on a whiteboard in a boardroom, or whether you want to use some kind of formal tool. I've got some tools for this as well. But it's just a framework for thinking about where is my deal risk? Because between opening and closing is the middle, and the middle is where most deals go to slip, stall, and die, right? So, once you've got an opportunity, it's a game of managing risk. So I'll just share my screen. And Mike, as you're, I won't be watching the comments here. So if you can watch the comments, Mike or Abby, and feel free to jump in and interrupt me. Please feel free to. So, first book I published over a decade ago is The Joshua Principle: Leadership Secrets of Selling. It explains this RSVP selling methodology. But basically, what I've come to learn with sort of 4 decades of working in professional selling is once we've got an opportunity, all of our risk in the deal comes around relationship coverage. Then do we have a winning strategy around managing those relationships and the politics, and also competition? So strategy at both a political and a competitive point of view. And then is there compelling business case value? A lot of sellers focus on their value proposition. We've got a value prop that we're blasting out into the marketplace that we're telling people about. But is there a really strong business case? Because I'm going to tell you a true story today about how I nearly failed enormously in a role of getting the job as sales director for a global software company. And I thought I could sell having this role, and I really struggled with my own CEO. So I'll talk about that. And then the fourth thing is process alignment. Like, do we really understand the customer's evaluation, selection, and then procurement process and timing? So they're just kind of the four areas. And if you're just thinking RSVP, you just say to your sales rep, hey, can you draw me out the relationships? Draw me a bit of an org chart. Let's talk about the power base and the politics, and where are we vulnerable? Where does the competitor have the relationships? What's your strategy to win the deal? The best strategy, by the way, is a change the rules strategy. Change the basis of decision, change the basis of engagement. We don't have time to go into that strategy today, but I talk about it in the book. And then what's their business case, right? I'll show you a way of doing this. Now, there's a really simple concept around all of this. It's a concept of bookending the deal. So I'm going to give you some very practical examples. And I know you've got this recording you can go back to later. And then obviously the fourth thing is process alignment. Do we have a mutual plan? You never want to call it a close plan with the customer. No one wants to be closed by a seller. We call it a mutual success plan, a project alignment plan. So I'll just sort of run through that for us. So, this is commonly what happens. We'll find an opportunity, or an opportunity will come to us. We'll go through the whole process, and then our champion or coach or sponsor, whatever your term du jour is when you think about the supporter in the customer organization, They'll be saying to you, no, you can't meet with my boss. I've got it. I'm making the decision. Stand by the fax machine. I'll go and get the rubber stamp approval. But then as they go up the line, they hear something like what you're seeing on the screen here. Look, hey, look, I know this makes sense. I know I asked you to actually go to market and have a look. I know I gave you a budget, but we've got seven other things right now. But I just heard Kelvin talk, and there's still a lot of uncertainty in the economy. Can we just push this off for another 12 months? Um, why should we do this over the other seven things that we could be doing? And often the person we're depending on to sell this internally, they're not a salesperson, but they really struggle to deal with that. So I'm going to give you a little framework today and some phrasing that really helps overcome that problem. So, just remember, just because someone asked for a proposal or they wanted a demo, if you're in the technology, in the land of technology, it doesn't mean they're committed to buying anything, right? So this thing of interest versus intent, right? And it's a real battle just to generate some interest today, because I don't know about you, but I get absolutely spammed and bombarded and blasted to death with AI generated crap, right? I've got over 300,000 followers in LinkedIn. Right now, if I showed you my inbox, I've got 28,000 unread messages in my email inbox. I've given up, just trying to. All I do every day is skim my inbox. That's all I can do. I've tried EAs. I'm doing some things with AI, right? But you think I've got to go skim all of this because there's important things there, but we're all increasingly just becoming blasted. So, Mike, can I ask you a favor? Can you have a look at the chat here? Just watch the chat. If you can just type in to chat, like what do you think gives you deal confidence? If you've got a deal, what is it about the deal, or what is it that goes on in a deal that gives you confidence? Just maybe type some things in. Just as you're typing, I'll give you one example I hear from reps. Oh, I had a great meeting. I had a great meeting. Oh, okay. Well, that'll give me deal confidence. I had a great meeting. What are the things you're seeing there, Mike?
So knowing, okay, so let's see, I've got knowing my, just need to start from the top. Knowing my offer can solve their problem, which is a good one.
Yep.
The questions the customers are asking. What do we got? Engagement from Jared. Technical support, certainty of a result, price and relationship, hearing the problems they want are solved by our USP, feedback and communication, frustration with the incumbent, budget approved, prospect clearly articulates problem and confidence we can solve. Prospect has a problem I can solve. Feedback on our performance. Yeah. Do you want me to keep going, Tony?
No, Mike, that's great. And look, and I agree with all of those. Maybe just some quick feedback on two of them. Um, you may have seen me present previously. It's a stat I often referenced by Corporate Executive Board and Gartner. Price, the reason to actually select the winner, price is typically only 9%, so it's less than 10% of decision weighting. If we think we should be confident in a deal because they're unhappy with the competitor, there's often a very short window of time where dissatisfaction with incumbent is a strong enough motivator to invest in the cost, the risk, the effort, and the pain of change. Often people will still stick with an incumbent even though they're unhappy. So I definitely agree with all of those things. Here's some other things here that, a rep might come back into the office and share. So I want to tell you a very short little true story. There's two stories I'm going to tell today. Here's the first one. When I was much younger, we sold ultralight aircraft in Australia. So they're small, what you might call microlight aircraft in New Zealand. They use them on farms. They look like little ragwing aircraft with lawnmower engines, maybe, but we had a dealership and sold them. So I could fly a plane, but I decided to actually buy myself an aerobatic little biplane as a sport aircraft. And I thought, this is a very different plane. It's heavier, it's faster. I could easily kill myself. And with microlights, you didn't need a pilot's license, believe it or not. I know this sounds insane. So I could fly without a pilot's license. You had to stay out of controlled airspace and things like that. But I went to an aero club to go solo in a Cessna. And I went solo in club record time, less than 6 hours of instruction with a flying instructor, because I could already fly anyway. But he was very nervous with someone so young and cocky going solo. And before he let me loose, he asked me a question. And it's sort of the question we just addressed. He said, Tony, as a pilot, what is confidence? And I thought, I guess confidence is when skill and experience all comes together, then you can be confident. And he just laconically shook his head and said, no, no. He said, confidence is the feeling you have just before you understand the situation. And I thought, wow. And he said to me, he said, almost, not all, but almost all dead pilots are dead because they were wrongly confident. They turned up at the airfield and didn't bother checking their pitot tubes, those little airspeed indicator tubes on the plane, whether a wasp had built a nest in it overnight. They didn't check whether kids had come onto the airfield and interfered with their aircraft or whether there was water in their fuel. They thought, oh, the weather will be okay. They weren't paranoid about the weather. So he taught me to fly in a way that's positively paranoid. He said to me, always be thinking about what could go wrong. If I lose my engine, where will I glide to? Because a plane will fly without an engine. It's just now a glider. And it saved my life because that plane, the plane you can see there, has only got half a propeller. I rotated the one half of the propeller that was still there around for that photo, but I actually botched my first landing in that aircraft and snapped the propeller. I replaced it and kept flying it. What I didn't know is there was a hairline fracture in the drivetrain. And every time I flew, the harmonic vibrations made that fracture worse until one day it failed above a pine forest and I became a glider. But on that flight where I had a forced landing, I was flying illegally high, not in controlled airspace, but illegally high, for the reason that if I lost my engine, would I be able to glide out of that forest? So, this thing of, confidence is the feeling we have just before we understand the situation was something that I then took into business and in sales for my whole life. I'm always thinking, I don't want to be negative, but be positively paranoid. What happens if my key contact leaves the organization? What happens if they select me and then they tell the incumbent or they tell the others on the short list, my competition, that they've lost, and that I'm going to be getting the business? What if my customer tells the competition that? Will they race in and do something desperate? And I've seen competitors do that, almost give their product away if they figured they'd lost. It's a very common thing in the software industry. I've seen Microsoft do that. So again, well, how would I manage that risk? So I've always said to my customers in those situations, if I've got a strong internal coach and sponsor, um, you know, what's your process now that, you've selected us as preferred? Because what we find is best practice is to keep the other shortlisted vendors on the hook while we go ahead and negotiate terms. So if anything goes wrong with the process, you've still got the others there, right? And they go, oh, actually, that's a good idea. We won't notify them they've lost until we've got all of the T's and C's and contracts signed with the successful vendor, right? And that's in their interest because if we fail to negotiate terms, they still want the others there without any ill will. And that's just an example of managing that particular risk. Or if you've got a strong sponsor, what are you going to do if the competitor that loses goes to your boss, and says that they'll half the price, right? What are you going to do if that happens, right? And you want that to be a landmine that competitor stood on that completely blows them up, where the customer's thinking, you mean you were trying to rip us off? You could have given us a much better price in the first place, and now you're trying to do this, right? You want the person you're working with to think, I don't want the competitors doing that because it makes me look like I wasn't running my process well. So the thing is just be positively paranoid and remember that confidence is the enemy of success. Now, there's lots of qualification frameworks that exist in the world. There's a whole list here. Now, what I'll do with Mike and Abby is I'll send them an email following today with a link to an article I wrote about next level qualification. It explains it'll give you the list of these frameworks, right? But there's all of these crazy acronyms. And in the technology industry, MEDIC or actually MEDPIC is actually the most common framework in simple, more transactional selling. BANT, budget authority, need and time frame is the most common framework. But the thing I want to say is beyond qualifying a deal, and prospects don't want to feel like they're being qualified by the seller, but beyond qualifying the deal, what we really want to do is qualify based on engagement. And what I'd really encourage you to think about in managing deal risk, it's the degree to which the customer will give you access to insider information, not in a corrupt way, but just in what's going on the inside of their organization, access to other key decision makers, and then work with you to co-create the business case and gather consensus. The degree to which those three things are going on is the degree to which you're likely to win the deal, right? So if they won't give you access to other people, they won't share with you what's going on the inside, and they won't work with you on co-creating a business case and getting consensus, then the deal's in trouble. Now, here's the second true story. And this is a confession of me doing things badly. I became sales director for a public corporation called Objective Corporation. They do a lot of business in New Zealand. They do document and records management, content management software, especially to governments, so Wellington Council, Auckland Council, a whole lot of government departments in New Zealand. And I became sales director. Tony Walls is the CEO and he races cars. So that's his car that he races. So I go ahead and get the job at Objective. And here's the really interesting thing is what I discovered was that I was the third head of sales in 3 years in this public company. So that tells you a lot, doesn't it? Like there's something going on. I'm the third person coming in to run sales globally in 3 years. So I knew that before I joined, and my boss said to me before I joined, your very first job, Tony, will be to go and select and then implement a CRM system. We need a CRM system. We need to get one. I thought, okay, so that'll be my first job. And he said, there's a project team internally. I want you to lead it. You run the process, bring me the recommendation, I'll sign it off. What I didn't know was that my two predecessors, he'd said the same thing to them. He'd said exactly the same thing to them. And they'd gone through the process and taken him their recommendation, the decision, and he didn't sign it off. Instead of signing it off, he got rid of them. Now he didn't fire them on the spot, but they got managed out of the business. And I wasn't aware of that. So I'm in my seventh Monday morning meeting in his office after I'd been there for about 2.5 months. I'm in my seventh Monday morning meeting, trying to get him to sign it off. I'd failed in the previous six. And I'm going to talk to you in a minute about how I bookended this concept of bookending the deal. So, just remember this thing of relationship coverage because I would not we end up going with Salesforce, by the way, as a CRM. I would not let Salesforce meet with my boss. They wanted to. I said, no, you're not meeting with the CEO. My job is to protect his time. It's my decision. He will rubber stamp it. That was a lie. Now, I wasn't intentionally lying, but people sometimes question the integrity of sellers. But the truth is, I think buyers are liars, or certainly naive misinformers of the seller that they're working with, right? But I should have let him get a meeting with my boss, right? I should have shared with him some inside information. I should have worked with him to nail the business case because I said we don't need to talk about the business case, right? I've got a budget. I've got pre-approval. I and the team are making the decision that my boss will just sign it off, right? So, and that wasn't true, right? There wasn't clarity about the process for doing this. So, just a couple of things about qualifying, and then I'll move on to bookending. Whenever we have inbound inquiry, often the buyer feels they're in control with lots of questions. Do you do this? Do you do that? How much do you charge? What does it cost? Who else have you done this for? And we need to be cooperative, but we also need to be able to reframe the conversation. So when they focus on why are you competitively or uniquely different to others, we need to respond to that and then also say, hey, what's happened inside your organization that's caused you to want to look at this? What improved results are you expecting? Where do you see the risks in getting this done successfully? When we're doing outbound pipeline creation, creating deals, remember this problem of interest without intent? rather than leading with this is who we are and what we do, we need to lead with why they should consider change now. So this is this concept of bookending. So this is really, really a key takeaway. So three questions at the front end of the deal, bookended and matched with three statements at the back end of the deal. But at the front, what's the trigger event? What's happened to cause you to look at this? What's the result you're trying to drive? Where do you see your risks? Now, you don't obviously jump into the where you do you see your risks until those first two things are nailed. I think you'd all agree with that, right? You don't want to scare the prospect away. For example, only about a third of CRM implementations are actually successful, right? So, like, I wouldn't be telling a prospect if I was selling CRM software that right out of the gates. But once they're committed that they have to get this in, I'd then be saying, great, where do you see your risks? What's your plan to manage those risks? And they go, well, what do you mean? You say, well, there's some key risks that are really important to manage. One of them is you want to make sure that you have clarity about the results you're driving, the experiences you're creating. You need to make sure it's funded to the right level, that you've got a really solid business case. So you don't do all of the work and then it doesn't get approved, or you don't get enough money to do it properly. And the one who educates the buyer is the one who becomes the emotional favorite. Now, the way that we bookend this is at the beginning, we're saying, what was the trigger event? What happened? Now, here's the answer with Objective Corporation. At Objective Corporation, the board had lost confidence in the CEO's ability to hit the number and actually, achieve the forecast and grow, right? That was what had happened inside the business. So that's the end of this statement of it's essential. So when you're closing the deal, you want us, our seller, or our coach inside the business to be able to say, it's essential because it pays for itself by, how is this going to pay for itself? It's essential because it pays for itself by, and we're going with this organization, their best value and lowest risk because. And in a tough economy, the mindset we need is it kind of doesn't matter whether they have a budget or not. We can help them create the business case. We can help them create the business case. So we're just on the home straight, and we'll go to questions. So just remember that if you or your sellers are getting this pushback of, hey, look, yes, it makes sense. Yes, we've got a problem. Your solution looks like it's great. But we've got all of these other priorities, or but, there's a lot of uncertainty in the economy right now, where they just typically want to wait. Right? So losing to no decision is the most common thing that goes on in a really tough economy, right? We just need to be able to say, this is essential because it pays for itself by, right? So, that it's really, really key. And if we open in a way that's around the trigger event that occurred and the business case that could be delivered, then we get to close around those same things, those same essential things. So what I ended up doing with Tony Walls, the CEO of Objective, in my seventh meeting, so here's the end of that story in the seventh meeting, is firstly, I recognized that he was of such a personality that he needed to be in control, even though he'd said it was my decision. He didn't really mean that, right? So he needed to make the decision. So I said, hey, Tony, I've been thinking about what you've been saying, and you're right. There are one of two ways that we can go, and I'm okay with either, right? So I didn't say this next bit, but that implied, you can make the decision. But I think we need to make the decision today. This is essential in restoring board confidence in you and the company's ability to hit our number, to achieve our growth commitments. And this is how you hold me to account, me, Tony Hughes, to account for driving the growth, right? That you've employed me to get done. And this is going to pay for itself within 5 months with higher deal win rates and improved margins from less discounting, a lower cost of sale. Because reps were just discounting things. It was very ad hoc and uncontrolled to try and close deals, often unnecessarily. We don't have time to go into that, but in the tech industry, we train our customers how to get discounts at the end of every period of desperation that we have when we don't really understand when they can buy. And then, we're going, in this case, it was Salesforce. Salesforce is best value and lowest risk because, and he approved it. And he approved it. So I'll just go ahead and finish there, and we can obviously go to Q&A. You can see on screen here, there's a QR code in the top right-hand corner. If you want to use your phone, you can connect with me in LinkedIn. I'll send out my contact details through Abby and Mike after this as well. And this book, the Joshua Principle, talks about this RSVP selling concept. It's really simple. I'm about to get the book done on print on demand with Amazon. That'll probably be another 2 weeks. But yeah, so I'll just stop sharing my screen and more than happy to take any questions and have a conversation.